Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me back on the show again after it's been a little while, but pleased to have back with me Jon Lewis. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Oh, thanks. Good to see you.
Yeah, and Jon is the Distinguished Professor of Film Studies at Oregon State University and my personal film mentor who guided me through for my film journey. So really happy to have you back on the show, Jon. We tend to have Jon back when he has new books out, which we should probably have you on more, not just when you have books out, but that's okay. And you're going to have a new one coming out pretty soon, well, probably within the next year on
Yes.
Die Hard of all movies, which I
Yes.
was just excited to talk about. So this is going to be on BFI Film Classics, where you've also had your books on The Godfather and The Godfather Part Two. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me, we want to start just talking a little bit about the book. Why Die Hard?
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons. One is they asked me, uh, and and it's a film that I remember when it came out for a very particular reason. I was teaching in England in 1988, the year it came out, and I taught the first half of the year, so sort of late August through January 1st, and or through December, and was flying back to the U.S. at the end of 1988 from London Heathrow, and my wife and I were thinking, well, there were two flights we could take, one to Seattle, and then the commuter flight down to Portland to be here, or the other one was to go to Detroit, so Heathrow to Detroit, and then Detroit, we'd stay there and spend Christmas with her parents. And we really just decided to go back home because we hadn't been there in 6 months and thought, you know, we should go back home and get ready for going back to work. And the flight we would have booked on was the flight that blew up over Lockerbie.
Oh,
And
wow.
that that uh, and
I had
the
no
flight
idea. I've
we
never
were
heard this story before. It's
yeah, so I
incredible.
have a connection to the film. It's a little obtuse, but not really. We took the flight the next morning when everything had changed. You know, we went into Heathrow, everybody's got, there are security people with automatic weapons at very, there's no TSA in 1988. So suddenly there is. Suddenly they're examining everybody, a bunch of times because of this disaster that they hadn't quite, they didn't know what exactly was behind it, but they did know that the flight began in Frankfurt.
Hmm.
And I remember in 1988, because I have this distinct memory of narrowly missing being dead, that the idea that there were terrorists in Germany was not science fiction. That number one, Baader Meinhof, which was this gang of sort of left wing, mostly young Germans,
Hmm.
who were objecting to American interference in German politics after the war, actually
Right.
had a grudge, like the character in Die Hard, against Americans, and they really were German terrorists. And so the assumption in Die Hard, the beginning of the film, that they're terrorists, which the hero doesn't learn until pretty much the end of the movie. We know early on, but he doesn't. Um, they really were German terrorists. So I had a sort of connection to it that I'm old enough to remember and have a kind of
Wow.
personal recollection of German terrorists, because that plane, the Lockerbie plane, which blew up basically about 5 months after the film came out, was a reminder that, yeah, the assumption in the movie that there are these German terrorists taking over an American building was not science fiction. It was on people's minds that there was
Hmm.
there was something coming, and that there were these young people in Western Europe of all places, that have a real grudge against the U.S.
Yeah.
And uh, the film's hook, in a way, which is terrorists take over a building. Turns out they're not terrorists, but that's the hook of the film, is something we all believe. So I had a kind of personal connection to it.
That's incredible. I've never heard that story before. That's absolutely incredible. Beyond the personal connection, though, it's an action movie that, at the time, it's kind of, what we would call a popcorn movie. And so it's very interesting that it's now in the BFI film classics, this
Yeah,
pantheon, if you will. And it's just a good old American action movie that's been, redone in a way to death. I mean, the formula of it, right?
yeah.
So what makes it a classic, I think, is what makes it worthy of the BFI.
Uh, well, they asked me, so they thought it was a classic, so I didn't have to make the
But you
argument.
were willing to write about it, and you
Yeah,
obviously thought it
I
was.
really do
So
think, it's a genre film, but it's in a lot of ways the kind of perfect action movie. I mean, it's it's early enough in the formula. It's a year after Lethal Weapon, same producer, arguably kind of the same structure.
mm,
Joel Silver, who produced those two, he also produced The Matrix, The Warriors before this, which is one of my favorite films. Um, uh, had a real hand in this more than the directors did. And
mm,
I think there's a real sense that he was creating a template for a new American cinema. So I think the
yeah.
film comes early enough in that and sort of perfects it. And then the films that follow try to reproduce it. So Speed, for example, famously was pitched in the industry as Die Hard on a bus.
hmm
And everybody knew what they were talking about because Die Hard had created this template.
Its own
And
genre, if it will.
Willis
Yeah.
is perfect in it. He's the perfect. Alan Rickman's chewing the scenery and having a great time, and he's really good in it. Bonnie Bedelia's fantastic in it. So I think it sort of does what it does, but it does it better than the films that have followed. Um,
Yeah.
and Lethal Weapon, as I said, comes out the year before, and it's a white hero running wild, and his sort of black, mild-mannered sidekicks. It's the same sort of character structure of the two films, and they're both built around sequences of action sequences that build towards a kind of apocalyptic climax.
hmm
So
Interesting.
it's a pretty simple structure, and they're built around charismatic actors, Mel Gibson and Lethal Weapon and Willis and in Die Hard. So I think that's why the film's seen as a classic. It sort of sets the mold that other films build on and does it really well. And if a film sets out what it's trying to do and then does it, I think you just have to say okay.
Yeah.
Can't want Die Hard to alter the human condition. You want Die Hard to get your blood going for 2 hours and then leave you happy and satisfied. And it does that.
Right. Yes, and not altering the human condition. But yeah, so you want to get into our review of it then? You want to talk
Mm,
about the movie a little bit?
sure.
Okay. Well, you're supposed to introduce it, but so why don't you introduce it? Talk about a little bit about the plot, and then I'm excited to talk about it because I just rewatched it, so it's super fresh in my mind. And after having not seen it for years, I had some new thoughts.
So this is Die Hard.
Yes.
Um, I don't know what exactly you want. I've I've seen it like 30 times this last year, so I almost don't know where to start. What would you like me to say about it?
Well, let's talk about let's just get into it. We don't need the
Okay.
plot. People know the plot, right? So Bruce
Yeah. Oh,
Willis's
well, I
character,
could
yeah,
start with the one
yeah,
interesting thing about the plot is that the trailer, which of course I had forgotten because I saw the trailer in 1988, I didn't see the film till after the Lockerbie bombing, which has a lot to do with how I watched the movie, even from the start. But the trailer, not to give away the plot, says 12 terrorists are about to take over a skyscraper in LA, which isn't what the film is about. It's a lie. The film is a caper film. It's
hmm
it's a cool caper, and we like caper films. I mean, Ocean's Eleven's caper film. Um, and these are experts. That's made clear in the very beginning of the film. These guys aren't fooling around. They know what they're doing. But they're not terrorists. And I think in a way that's the interesting thing about the plot. that the film is a letdown. We're promised a terrorist movie at the very moment Americans are thinking, talking, discovering terrorism, and it isn't. And everybody's disappointed, as
Yeah.
everybody in the film discovers, including Takagi, who gets killed like a minute after. He says, "You mean you're not terrorists?" And they're disappointed. And then he dies. And then later, Bonnie Bedelia, who plays Holly, says the same thing. Like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, we've been doing all of this and you're just thieves. And then in the end, the very famous scene where John sort of stumbles out with his bloody feet and says, this is just a robbery. It's like, yeah, it's just a robbery. So I think
Yeah.
in a way the film brilliantly disappoints us and then somehow still succeeds in exhilarating us.
But isn't the point of that the fact that all the characters also think they're terrorists? So they have to kind of keep that going because their actions from the local police, the LAPD to the FBI, they even call it the terrorist playbook, right? So they are acting and behaving as if they're terrorists, which is one of the reasons they mess things up so badly. And Bruce Willis's character of John McClane, he doesn't know for sure. He just knows it's bad guys, and he's used
Yeah.
to as a cop going after bad guys. So he's just going by the bad guy playbook. But the FBI, one of the reasons they bungle things so badly is they're like, we have the terrorist playbook, and this is how we act. Well, so that kind of misinformation, or they're being misled, is one of the reasons everyone bungles things so badly.
Yeah, but again, I'm a historian, so I tend to think of things in sort of historical context. You have the Iran-Contra things, 79, 80,
Hmm.
um, and not Iran-Contra, sorry, the Iranian embassy takeover in the revolution against the Shah, and you have Reagan coming in, running off of settling that finally, because Carter, at the end of his presidency, wasn't able to resolve the problem. And you've got the Iranian hostage problem in everybody's mind. And Reagan swears not to negotiate. And so the FBI show up, and they're going to just attack the building because that's the Reagan mantra. But you also
Hmm.
know that the federal government's going to screw it up because that's also the Reagan playbook, that government's too big and it's incompetent. We have the same discussions in politics today. And this assumption that smaller government is better. Well, the problem is anybody who comes representing the government is going to screw it up. The one
Hmm.
person who isn't going to screw it up is the one who doesn't listen to anybody, which is John. And that point is sort of hammered home. Um, and I think one reason why I think the film works better now than Lethal Weapon is that in Lethal Weapon, he's just a really scary cop. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, now we know too much about scary cops. So that character is not particularly attractive anymore, Riggs in
Yeah, and
Lethal
Lethal
Weapon.
Weapon.
Whereas John he's talking to himself, he's funny, self-effacing, he's Bruce Willis, he's not this sort of perfect chiseled body that we're sort of used to in these films, kind of looks like a person. Um, he looks like it's the classic, he's somebody you'd like to go out and have a beer with. He kind of
Hmm.
is. Uh, and he doesn't listen to the feds, and he knows that they're going to screw it up. The minute the
Yeah.
FBI shows up, you could see he's like, "Oh God, now I have to fight them too."
Yeah.
And that's
Well, and the
so Reagan.
LAPD gets it wrong. And
Yeah, and
before
that's
that,
so of
you
the
have the
moment.
guy who was the principal in Breakfast Club, who's just so good at always playing just these total jerk guys.
Yeah,
He's just
yeah,
so idiotic right from the beginning.
yeah. They're all kind of. It's funny to be a character actor, and those are the roles you get because it's good words. You probably just say yes all the time,
Yeah.
and you're probably recognized at a restaurant saying, "Oh, you're the jerk from Breakfast Club."
And
Yeah,
Die Hard. You're a jerk in both movies.
yeah,
But
yeah.
one of the things I noticed on repeat viewing that, I know it was always there, but I think, 2024, watching it through different lenses. So in terms of the solo hero man, John McClane does have help in this movie, and from really three primary characters. His wife, right, as you mentioned, played by Bonnie, who's really terrific in it, and is kind of is a powerful career woman. She's really smart, and part of the tension in their marriage is that he's been kind of this macho jerk and didn't move with her for her career, and this caused this rift between them. His machismo caused this rift, right? And then the black police officer, Owl, who is very kind and is the only one who really listens to him. And then the limo driver, Argyle, who is kind of ineffectual for a lot of the movie, but then has his big moment at the end where he helps out. And I found it very interesting. In 1988, you did have Lethal Weapon the previous year, but a lot of the big action movies in the 80s were not exactly very diverse. And even the nerd character who you see in every movie, it's such a template, the guy who's the hacker, the computer guy. In this movie is a black character with glasses instead of a white guy with glasses, but it's usually some sort of nerd hacker. That's a little twist that you don't really see that many in that many action movies even today.
Well, I think that sort of comes out of um, uh, Beverly Hills Cop, which precedes this,
Right.
and you have the sort of comic black lead who's sort of running rogue. I've actually rewatched some of these, and Beverly Hills Cop is just terrifically entertaining still. And that's a film built around a black star. And then you had the one with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
Trading Places.
Yeah, Trading Places.
Am I
No,
saying the
they're
wrong one?
cops. Yeah, I was thinking Trading Places. I don't think that's right. But it doesn't matter that you had this other film. So I do think they're already experimenting with this. What's interesting about Die Hard, and there's actually a lot of literature about this, people writing about this, is that it kind of reverses the stereotypes where the white guy is running wild
Hmm.
and the black guy is kind of mild and a kind of company man. In Lethal Weapon, Raj, who's played by Danny Glover, who could play an action hero if he wanted to. He's a big guy, he sort of fits the
Hmm.
mold, but he wants to retire. All he wants to do is retire. And
Right.
then along comes crazy Mel Gibson and it throws everything into disarray. And
Right.
in Die Hard, Al has had an unfortunate incident on the streets where he shot somebody. And he's been put behind a desk and he's made mild until his encounter as he's sort of rescued from the desk job by his encounter relationship with John.
But he
Um,
also rescues John at the end, so that was
he
very
saves him.
interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
Raj saves Riggs at the end of Lethal Weapon. It's a formula,
Yeah.
and uh, in Hollywood, once you do something and it works once, they're going to do it
They
until it doesn't work five times. So
and they did that with five Die Hard movies, in fact.
yeah, until it
And
really
it was
didn't work.
48 Hours. That's the movie. I couldn't 48 Hours was the one with Nick
48
Nolte
hours,
and
yeah,
Eddie
which
Murphy. I was
actually is
getting
a
them
lot of
mixed up.
fun. And in that one, it's like taming the black guy. So there's another way of reading these movies, that it's a kind of wish fulfillment for white Americans who are afraid of black men. And here are these sort of black men who all they want to do is retire or listen to music in the limo while this
Right.
action film's going on. I mean, Argyle's sort of blissfully listening to music and talking on the telephone in the limo, and telephones and
Uh,
cars were, kind of unheard of in 1988. And he's just like hanging out, and um, Al has been sort of taken off the streets, and he's introduced buying Twinkies in a convenience store in Die Hard. Al is
right.
for his pregnant wife, and the guy behind the desk doesn't buy that for a second. It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, these
He's just
Twinkies
like,
are for your
sure,
wife.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. And I know we have to move on to our next films, but just before we move on, the one thing I want to mention and to see if you talked about it in your book, I read somewhere online that originally I think other action stars passed on this movie originally, and Wes Willis wasn't the first pick. Is that correct?
I don't talk about it in the book, and that's certainly possible. I he Willis was in Moonlighting, which was a popular TV show, and in those
Right.
days, moving from television to film was not like it is
Not
now, where
easy. No.
yeah, I mean, actors today go back and forth because television in a lot of ways is more consistently better than feature films these days. Sort of sad thing to say, but true. In those days, it was very seldom done, and there really weren't too many leading men who were able to do it. The film was, in my view, when the studio was developing it, they were really careful about it. Lethal Weapon was a huge hit, so Joel Silver, the producer, had a lot of stock and these guys try to strike while the iron's hot. They put together the Die Hard project, which is based on a novel that's a sequel to a novel called The Detective, which was made into a movie with Frank Sinatra in the 60s. The first book's really good, The Detective. The second book, Nothing Lasts Forever, which is what Die Hard's based on, not a good book. But they had to move fast, and Predator was a hit right before this, and John McTiernan, who directs Die Hard, had directed Predator. But everybody figured Predator was a hit because of Arnold and not because of McTiernan. So there are all these things in Die Hard where they're grabbing at people who aren't stars, who aren't big directors, action film directors. Lethal Weapon was Richard Donner, very big director at the time. McTiernan, nobody even knew who he was, and so I think with Willis, I don't think anybody at Fox thought Die Hard was going to be what it was, and then everything hit. It would have been so
made a
awesome.
bundle of money.
Well, it would have been so awesome to be at the rough cut screening with the Fox executives, and they watched this movie and said, "Holy crap, we didn't spend money on a star, we didn't spend money on a big director. Who the hell is Alan Rickman?" Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And oh my God, we've struck gold.
Gold, yeah. And Alan Rickman, just one of the great movie villains of all time, in my opinion. So just
And
because he's
apparently
so
one of the
intelligent.
world's nice guys. So there you are.
Yeah, it goes. Well, he's a good actor. So, okay, well, we have to move on to our
I
next
can
movie.
see, yeah, I've got a little clock on my thing. So yeah.
Okay, so do you want to introduce Furiosa?
Well, yeah. When we had planned out this episode, we talked about action films and summer action films. People forget Die Hard was released in July, even though it's set in Christmas time. It was a big summer film. So I thought, let's look at the big summer films now and see how they're different than Die Hard. So Furiosa is a prequel to the Mad Max story, I guess, or a background story, a parallel story, and it's the first Mad Max film without Max. And I kind of there are aspects of this film I think that get really right, and there are aspects of this film that certainly take lessons from a film like Die Hard. But I know lots of people didn't like the movie much, and for $180 million investment, way different than what the studio threw at Die Hard. There's a lot of talk in the industry that, wow, this summer season's not 1988, that's for sure. It's not. There are no films that are, dramatically out earning investment the way they had years ago. So
did you like Fury Road, the previous George Miller
it's a
film?
better, I think everybody thinks it's a better film. I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought that film was really quite good.
Well, yeah, Fury Road, I mean, some people would think it's one of the best action movies of this century. And I think that's probably, it's arguable, but it's definitely up there. I liked Furiosa. I like this film. I think I think it's hard to top a movie like Fury Road because it was so different than anything we'd seen quite in its way. It just seemed like George Miller was just really going for it, creatively. But I think there's a lot of good things here. I just think the expectations maybe were too high. I felt like it was too long, and I've been thinking that about action movies for a while. There's a lot of big speechifying by Chris Hemsworth's character at the end, which I found tiresome. I kind of wanted her to just shoot him and shut him up and move on. But it, the visuals and the world that he's created with the Mad Max movies, I feel like is still. I don't know. To me, it was very exciting. I'm surprised that it's been considered such a disappointment in some ways.
Well, too long. It seems like every film's too long.
Yeah.
Because it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes or something, isn't it? It's really long. Yeah, it is. And I think the problem is everybody from the previous film was better than everybody in this movie. So Charlize Theron was better than
Anya Taylor-Joy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, Tom Hardy. What's his first name?
Oh, Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy. Yeah, that sounded wrong because it's the author, but yeah, Tom Hardy was better than Chris Hemsworth. I was sort of like in every sort of lead role was sort of better the last time. But on its own, if you didn't see the other movie, it's terrifically entertaining. And I think one of the things I was thinking about when we first talked about this is, what do you get right in these movies? And there is no plot. It's just one chase after another, one thing exploding after another. So there's to go to these movies for plot is kind of foolish. And to go for performances even, I think maybe isn't necessary. So that Anna Taylor-Joy's not Charlize Theron and Hemsworth is not Tom Hardy. Doesn't matter because the movie's still entertaining. What the movie does get right um, are all the other sort of aspects of production design. What struck me about this, and then the other film, if we have time to talk about it, the new Planet of the Apes film, is that both films, the production design is brilliant.
Hmm.
The
It looks
even the
fantastic.
location stuff is amazing. You know, somebody's got to scout these locations and secure these locations, and not just think about, oh wow, that's a pretty landscape or that's a pretty waterfall for Planet of the Apes. It's, you know, how can we shoot here and what's going to work for the plot? Because they're looking at the script,
Hmm.
and both films do that brilliantly. And then you get sound design, you know, another thing that we don't think about that much when we go to movies. We think of visuals, you know, and again, we think of performance and plot, which is absolutely irrelevant in these movies. What's amazing in Furiosa and in the Planet of the Apes film um, is the production design. You know, the
Hmm.
sets or the costumes. I mean, the costumes in Furiosa are just so brilliant.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The
and
look in
you know,
general, all the
we tend to
characters.
forget that that's why movies are awesome. You know, that there are production meetings before anybody shows up on the set where they've got costumes. You
Yeah,
don't like make a costume when everybody shows up. The costumes are there. You know, the locations are there. Um, the sound design is already planned. There are already people working on sound design. Um, and I saw Planet of the Apes in IMAX. I saw Furiosa in a really, I saw it at Cinema 21 and, you know, big screen, and with really good sound systems, and made all the difference.
and you can't beat that for a good time at the movies. We only have a few seconds, but I do want to mention Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes really fast. I was a little disappointed because I really liked the previous trilogy that Matt Reeves directed, focused on Caesar, the young ape. This one, I thought visually, you're right, it was very good looking. I think what it lacked, though, and just to get back to Die Hard, is it lacked personality to you had Caesar in the previous ape movies. Now we've introduced this new young ape named Noah, and I just didn't think he had the same personality. And I would agree with you that those movies are it is important. I mean, it is what people go for, but I do think what Die Hard shows is that people still want a character that they, John Bruce Willis was just great in Die Hard. He's funny, he's charismatic, he's a character you care about. You want to see what he's going to do, and you kind of lack that in some of these movies.
Uh, yeah, I guess, but I'm entertained. I was entertained just looking at it and listening to it and realizing, yeah, it's not as good as the last one. In either case, but
Right.
it's better than superhero films. So there's
Well,
that.
that we can agree on for sure. It's definitely better anything than anything Marvel or DC is putting out. Thanks so much for being on the show, John. I hope you'll come back and we'll talk more about movies soon. And when your book's out, we can have you back on to actually hold it up, but then we'll talk about something else. We don't need
Oh,
to do
okay.
it
Yeah, that sounds fine.
now.
And
Okay.
very good seeing you as always.
Okay. As always, have a great day and great movies. Thanks.